All right. Good evening. Um, Tonight, I want to speak about the 8 worldly winds. I asked the Sangha to spend a little bit of time with this meditation. And, but this is an important teaching in Buddhism because it is considered the main way in which we spin, in which we get stuck in samsara. And so they are variously called the 8 conditions, the 8 worldly winds, or the 8 worldly conditions, vicissitudes, concerns, preoccupations, or my personal favorite, obsessions. And I think, I like obsessions because it describes well the push and pull, right, of these 8 winds and the way that they buffet us, like wind whipping saplings in a storm. Some teachers actually saw a couple call them anxieties, the 8 worldly anxieties or hang-ups. Of course, more modern interpretations, but I like those two because they really capture this sense of being thrown about by these pairs, by these sets of extremes. And of course, that causes anxiety. So our chasing and holding on to what is pleasurable and pushing away, avoiding what is unpleasant, what is painful. And as we do this, there's very little to keep us grounded, to keep us centered, to keep us. I sometimes like to speak of it of on our feet, our own feet, standing on our own ground. The image actually that just came to me is that of one of those metal chairs, those metal desks and chairs that they have in schools, just getting dragged across the street in a hurricane. One of my friends was in New York City during Hurricane Sandy, and this is one of the few things that she saw, one of those heavy metal chairs just getting thrown across the street. But it's actually even a little more out of control than that, a little crazier. So a fellow teacher describes being caught by these 8 winds, like one of those tube men. They also call them air dancers. So they're outside, used car dealerships, those figures, that are floating around, flailing. And if you stop and really notice what it's like to be gripped by one of these winds, desire, for example, by our attachment for things, for approval, for power, for attention, if you really feel the desperation that can come over us when we've lost one of these for a period of time, then this is a good image, that of a tube man. Because in chasing after our happiness, we really are, just flailing about when we meet things that we can't control, we can't pin down, can't will into shape the way we would like. Somebody was telling me about a comedian who really was speaking, not exactly about this because his language was not Buddhist, but who was speaking about our pursuit of happiness. And he was saying, on any given night, I can have a room full of people in stitches, just laughing away, at my jokes. But then one night, there's one woman sitting in the front row, and she's not even looking at me. She looks kind of angry or worried or depressed, he can't tell. And he spends his whole set obsessing about her. Like, you don't think my jokes are funny. You think like you're too good to laugh, like everyone else. And so he's going through his routine, but a big part of his mind is on this woman and the fact that he can't get her to laugh. And stuck. In the midst of this, at one point, she looks down at her phone and then gets up and starts to walk away. And the man who's sitting next to her gets up and leaves, starts to leave as well. And so he calls out after them, "Hey, you're leaving? What? I mean, you don't like my show?" Kind of like trying to put them on the spot. And she says, really just kind of over her shoulder, "My mother's in the hospital. I just got a note." And the guy shrinks into himself. There I was, thinking it was about me. That what happens, right, what others do or don't do, is about me. And I sometimes think it's like giving our self-worth, just taking it in our hand and just giving it to someone else and saying, "Okay, here, you take care of this for me. You tell me how much I'm worth and why." I mean, we wouldn't willingly do this, consciously do this. And yet this is exactly what we do in a million little ways. You tell me how I should dress, what I should drive, where I should live, how I should speak, how I should look. You tell me if it's up to par. And not just you, but you and you and you and you and you. You take care of my happiness for me. I mean, how crazy is that? Why would anyone do such a thing? Indeed. So there's a sutta called the Lokavipati Sutta, probably Lokavipati Sutta, translating as the failings of the world. And the Buddha says, these 8 worldly conditions spin after the world, and the world spins after them. Which 8? Gain and loss, fame and disrepute, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. And so, this pretty much covers it, you think about it. All the ways in which we spin after the world and the world spins after these winds. Having and not losing. For many of us, perhaps not being famous, but being known, being recognized. Definitely not being ignored, not being disgraced. Getting praise, avoiding criticism. And then the one that supports the other 6, pleasure and pain. The one that really carries the whole thing. The wish to have and to keep what feels good, and the attempt to avoid what feels bad. But as we study these and we study their antidotes, and there are a number of antidotes, I do think we have to be careful, not to vilify ourselves, to put ourselves down, or even these states. So sometimes when we speak of some of these teachings, and on one hand, there's the risk, the danger that we'll think, well, if I just work hard enough, I'll get to a place where I will be beyond these. I won't crave. I won't push away my feelings of, doubt or insecurity or pain or boredom. I will be equanimous. I will be clear, never unclear. And on the other hand, if it's not that expectation, of ourselves, that unrealistic expectation, then there is, I think, sometimes a subtle tendency to take a teaching and put it in a box that is labeled undesirable. Like that there are certain behaviors, there are certain states of mind, of being, that are undesirable. We wouldn't want to be caught in gain and loss, fame and disrepute. But I think this is where Buddhism is a lot more subtle, because it acknowledges that we do get caught. As I often quote my friend Yeshe saying, you can't escape samsara. It's not really, none of the teachings are asking us to extract ourselves from reality, certainly from our own humanity. And the reason I say this is because sometimes, one of you will say something, will say a phrase, and then you yourself will stop and correct yourself, like it's not the right thing to do. Well, I was thinking about blah, 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 like thinking is a bad thing, and then you catch yourself. No, I know it's not about thinking. But we know, I mean, without thought, we can't be having a conversation even. And so none of these things are bad. We're being asked to have a more nuanced approach to them, a more understanding approach to them. So when we get caught wanting power, wanting recognition, or at least, wanting a little bit of approval, we recognize it. First and foremost, we see it, we acknowledge, oh, this is what's happening. I want somebody to pat me on the back and be like, good job, good job. And why not? Acknowledgement of someone's being or someone's work. I mean, that's really nice. There's nothing wrong with that. And so, there has to be more than just trying to find a place where these winds won't touch us. So I remember years ago, I had been practicing maybe a year or two. And I was visiting my family in Mexico. And one day my dad, he was just asking about the practice and why I was doing it, which was really good practice, by the way. And some of you have expressed, your families asking and you having to explain, what is it that you do? What is it that you do on Wednesday night? What do you talk about with Zuisei? What do you do when you're sitting quietly? And it's really wonderful to be asked to stretch, to be able to say to someone in very simple terms, right, without the Buddhist jargon, this is what I do. This is why I do it. This is how it helps me. Because then if it is helping you. You're able to remind yourself when you don't feel like doing it. And so, my dad was asking me about practice. And at some point I said something like, life is so much more than being comfortable. And he just looked at me and he's like, what's wrong with being comfortable? And I wasn't mature enough at the time to say, you're right, nothing. There's nothing wrong with comfort. There's nothing wrong with pleasure, with enjoying things, liking things, enjoying someone praising you. And so then why this teaching? And I was thinking we probably could really just boil it down to one sentence: wanting things to be otherwise. I mean, the entirety, perhaps, of the Buddhist canon could be boiled down to that sentence: wanting things to be otherwise. That is the very definition of suffering. So when we get those things that we want, a new car, a new house, a new job, a new partner, I mean, we like it, right? We like it when we get a promotion, when someone likes our social media, when they praise our kids, our personality. So of course, we like it when things go well and we want more of it. But of course, the problem is when things change, which is all the time. The problem is not even that things change, but that we lose our peace, that we lose our inner stability. That's why that image of the air dancer is a good one, because it's all air. That's why it gets buffeted this way and that. There's nothing anchoring it. And so when the world shifts and flows, and I can't flow with it, what will be the result is suffering. This is not difficult to see. It's not difficult to understand even. It's difficult to practice. It's difficult to live. That's why I love that phrase that one of our teachers used years ago. The self cannot move at the speed of impermanence. Because it is so true. The self, our idea, not even the idea, our holding on to the self is what's heavy, is what's burdensome. Seeing through the self is light. It makes us fleet of foot. When I was in high school, I was on the track team, and one of the drills that we would periodically do was to run sprints with a big tire tied to our waist. So we had a belt tied to a rope, tied to a big one of those truck tires. So it was like a big, we actually had different sizes. I would have a smaller tire than one of the guys who threw shot put, for example. Actually, I threw shot put, if you can believe it. So we had different size tires. And one of the guys actually would have someone sit on his tire, and then he would run, he would pull them. And then we would do short sprints, sometimes on a beach volleyball court, to get even more drag, more friction. And then you would take off the belt and then run sprints. And of course, you felt like you were flying. And, constantly needing to feed the self, buoy the self, protect the self, keep it up. It's very much like dragging that tire around everywhere we go. Because, so the self wants what it wants. And it doesn't want to feel pain or sickness or discomfort. It doesn't want to feel aging or loss of any kind, which is a bit of a problem, given how often pain and sickness and discomfort and aging and etc. show up in our lives. I was reading an article by a man about a man who years ago, about 20 years ago, hire an architect to build a life extension center in Texas. And so this is one of those places where they do cryonics or cryogenics. They're called both ways. You basically freeze either your whole body, in some versions just your head, because it's cheaper, in the hope that the technology will be such. Imagine that would be like, and you can go on the website and have a list and read a list of the non-confidential patients or customers that have done this since 1975, something like that. And it will say such and such, whole body, case study, such and such, neuro, I think just the head is called something like neuropreservation, something like that. So it's just your head. And they have them in these vaults. Creepy. And the idea is that technology will be such that you'll just grow a body, that yourself, what is most important about you, your memories and your personality, etc., is housed in your head, in the brain. And so that the rest will follow. But I was really thinking about this, so let's say that I just freeze my head. And so I get a whole new body, which will, of course, would be younger, will be healthier by the time they revive me, Zuisei 2.0. And I was thinking, will it actually work? I mean, let's say that we get there, that technology really is such that at some point it's possible. Because I'm not at all certain that everything that is scored to me is housed in my brain. I certainly don't have the same body I had when I was 5 or when I was 15, but I also don't have a completely different body. And there are certain things that I believe are stored in my muscles, in my cells. I like that well-known book, The Body Keeps the Score. So what will happen, if everything from here down is completely different? And then what will happen with the head? I mean, let's say that you do like 7 iterations, several. I mean, it has to deteriorate because not even a head on ice is eternal. And it's so interesting. And this isn't just this, I think of artificial intelligence. I think of, the singularity and that point where, we will be more and more, according to some, merged with machines, that we dedicate so much time. And by the way, no offense, but 95% of the patients, the customers, were men, which I think is also telling. I think is also, not exclusively, but most of them were men. It's so interesting to me that with things like this, that we think we should do it. If we have the ability to do it, we should do it. But that the deeper, that the more profound, more subtle, probably much harder to see implications, we don't even consider. Could a person's, let's say, morality change if they feel that they can, in fact, live forever? I work with someone, so one of the people, and I've been working with them for actually a number of years now. They're not formally my student, but I've been working with them for a while now. They would have the ability, they have the resources to do something like this. And the other day, I forget what we were talking about, and they brought up, because they are friends with Richard Kurtzman, I believe his name is, who first proposed the idea of the singularity, where essentially artificial intelligence will surpass human intelligence. They're friends, they're in that circle. And so they see it as a possibility, perhaps remote, but as a possibility that maybe one day we could live forever. And so I said, would you? If you had the choice, would you? Unequivocally, they said yes. Yes. Unequivocally, I said no when they asked me if I would. I am happy to become loam or mushrooms or, something else to grow when the time comes, to become earth and water and sky, give something else its turn. Because there is something I feel about life. Of course, its poignancy to know that it does not last forever. And you know, when you've had loss early in life, or relatively speaking, you know that. You have a sense, you know, and it's not that I feel like I will die tomorrow, but I don't take my life for granted. And I hope that I never will. I don't take my health for granted. You know, I want to think, you know, that I care, you know, for my body, for my mind, because I want all of it, the whole system, to work as well as it can, so that I can really do what I want to do and offer what I want to offer. And I would rather do that myself and not be replaced with digital parts. Although, you know, I think it's one of those things where, you know, it's a fine line. There's diseases that are being cured and will be cured, probably, that, you know, before was unthinkable. So, you know, it's just, you just want so badly for us to do it well. And our track record is not so great. Given how we care for things, is not so great. Oh. Now, in terms of actually working with these 8 winds, so there's a number of antidotes. And I wrote about this. Gain and loss, gratitude and appreciation. I've spoken of this before, you know, so instead of focusing on what we lack, we turn to what we have. We remind ourselves, as one teacher said, enough is a feast. And it's always been also, you know, very interesting to me and a little disturbing that our negative bias is so strong. Right? As the comedian said, you know, there's 50 people in the room, 49 are laughing, but there's the one that isn't, who isn't. And that's the one you will remember. I mean, I've been there. I've been there. And so part of this training, this mind training, is you know, it goes well beyond, I believe, positive thinking, but it's really training the mind to focus and highlight what is most important. And of course, what will help and not harm. And so with gain and loss, perhaps also to invoke the Buddha's last teaching, at least according to the Mahayana tradition, right? To have few desires, to learn to be satisfied. Easily said, not so easily done. And this practice doesn't just benefit us. It benefits those who have less than we do, and it benefits this great planet on which we rely for our sustenance. Because taking more than we need is literally killing us. And so, you know, practicing moderation and appreciation isn't just for Instagram, isn't just for monastics. I believe it's really for everyone who wants humanity to endure, to actually grow and evolve and prosper. And so we can practice not fueling desire with our thought. I want, I need, I must have. And then to remind ourselves that it is actually very much like the wind. It needs an outside force. Wind needs temperature and pressure and the rotation of the earth. And without these, wind dies down. It has nothing to propel it. Without craving, desire calms. Desire is very much a self-fulfilling engine. And it's built into it to persist. And so we have to, at a certain point, we have to be willing to just cut it. Either cut it at the root or let the mind be stable enough to let it quiet down. Fame and disrepute or disgrace, some translations call it, we can remind ourselves of impermanence. Sometimes we're up, other moments we're down. Which is, of course, also true of praise and blame. You know, they're only slightly different. There's always going to be someone who's better at something that we do at some point. There's always someone who loves what we do, someone who doesn't. But our freedom, our actual happiness, our peace of mind doesn't depend on another's opinion. Right? So this is taking back our power and putting it where it belongs. Here, in our own conviction about our actions, just about the way we want to live our lives. And so in a sutra, the Brahmajala Sutta, the Buddha says to his monks, you know, if others speak in this phrase, I'm not sure that that's even a word, but that's what it said, in this phrase of me, or the dharma, or the sangha, you should not give way to resentment, displeasure, or animosity. But if others speak in praise, you should not give way to jubilation, joy, and exaltation. And then he goes on and he says, basically, your anger or your joy, if you hold on to it, will only create obstacles for you. And then he says, the point is not what someone thinks of me or my teaching, but whether their statements are true or false. So really take in what they're saying, and then you ask yourself, is this true? Does it accord with the facts? Namely, the facts of suffering and its cessation, nirvana. In other words, focus on what's important. And so we can do the same. We can ask ourselves, somebody praises us, somebody criticizes us, and we can ask ourselves, is this true? Is it based on fact? More important, will it lead to my liberation? If the answer is no, let it go. Let it go, let it go, let it go. If the answer is yes, take it up. It doesn't matter what the source is. Zhaozhou, the great Zen teacher Zhaozhou, famously said, if there is a child who's 10 years old, has something to teach me, I will learn from them. If I meet a person who's 100 years old and I can teach them, I will teach them. The story says he was 18 when he became enlightened, and he traveled around and doing a pilgrimage, studying with other teachers, testing his understanding until he was about 80. And then he decided, okay, now I'm ready to teach. Imagine what he must have been like in Dharma Encounter. Apparently, he didn't have many successors. I think he had one. But you know, what others think is irrelevant, what they think about you. And then the antidote to pleasure and pain is essentially non-possessiveness. One more sutra, the Natumhaka Sutta. And the Buddha said, let go of what isn't yours. And what is not yours, whatever is experienced, either as pleasure or as pain, that's not yours. So let go of it. When I came across this, I thought that was a really wonderful way to speak of pleasure and pain. What you have, what you've been given, isn't yours. You just have it for the time being. What you have lost, what has gone away, what has changed, that's not punishment. it wasn't yours either. It was its time to go away. So when you let go of what is not yours, this will be for your long-term happiness and benefit. Don't claim that good that isn't yours to claim. Don't claim the bad that comes to you. Why me? And because it isn't yours, you can just let it go instead of holding on. You can let it arise, and then you can let it pass. And I wrote, that holding on is really like trying to bottle the summer breeze. Why would you do such a thing? Letting go is like opening a window. The breeze flows through. And it actually is very much like that. It's unnatural to hold on to what is not ours, which is really all of it, is unnatural. It's cramped, ineffective. When we're able to open and let, as Rebecca said in her book, right, on illumination, I always forget the order of the three. I think it's let go, let be, let through, let be. Go ahead.
Let through, let be, let go.
Let through, let be, let go. And there you go. The first one is let through, because that is free, while holding on isn't. And then if none of these antidotes work, equanimity, upeksha. And that's usually the core, the main antidote given for these 8 winds as a group, right? Which, makes sense. If the problem is to get thrown from one extreme to the other, to get caught in the highs and lows, and then the solution would be to focus on that which keeps us grounded. And recently I was speaking of upeksha, and I was saying, it's really like riding a wave. Right? You don't wait until the sea is calm. You certainly don't try to calm the sea yourself to get to a point where there are no waves. That point will come. Well, no, maybe not even then. I was going to say when you die, but maybe not even then. And so in my interpretation of upeksha, you learn to ride the wave. And here it's very helpful to remind ourselves, again, these highs and lows they just come with being human. Aging and dying is not a bug in the system. It comes with living. And of course we want what feels good and we don't want what feels bad. We're wired to not like pain because partly it keeps us alive. People who suffer from congenital insensitivity to pain, they tend to die sooner because they don't have the usual alarms to avoid what can harm them, like a 3rd-degree burn or a broken bone. And so babies, they tend to die very young. So from this perspective, pain is good. It serves a function. Of course, we want to be liked, not disliked. This keeps us within the tribe where we have a higher chance of survival. It's when we let ourselves be led around by these winds that we run into avoidable suffering. I recently heard another teacher say, I have heard this before. She was quoting Ajahn Chah saying there is, in a sense, good suffering and bad suffering. Good suffering is the suffering that comes from the hard work of practice, for example, maybe the pain of your achy legs when you sit for long hours. And then there's the bad suffering, which we're all well acquainted with. And Ajahn Chah said, if you're not willing to bear, to put up with a good kind of suffering, you're not very likely to work with a second kind. And there's another way to think about equanimity when it comes to these winds, to ask ourselves, like, what do these winds want? Or like, what is their purpose? It's not like they want something, but like, what is their purpose? Because the self that is, being thrown this way and that, as we know, just wants to be happy. And despite the evidence, sometimes it does want to be free. It's just not going about that project in a very efficient way. And so we do have to be willing to put up with a little bit of discomfort. The discomfort of sitting still as pain and pleasure arises, as the thoughts of wanting recognition, approval, the pain, the embarrassment, the cringe factor of being disliked in some way, criticized, come up, and to just stay steady. It's like weighing one of those tube men with a sandbag or something, like start filling in the body with a sandbag, with sand. And so it starts to get more stable. It's harder to move it. And paradoxically, it's also to let the ballast go, right? To take off the belt, take off that tire we've been dragging around, which is really, this is what's so curious about it. That something as insubstantial as an idea can be so incredibly burdensome. So we take off that belt. We take off the tire that is our desire for power, for recognition, for wealth, for security, by means where it will never be actually procured. And so we could think of equanimity as that moment when we look down and we realize, oh my God, I'm wearing a belt. And we look back and we see the rope and we see the tire dragging across the sand. A big fat tire. And we think, oh, okay, here it is. So in this moment, I have a choice. I either continue to pull this along or I cut the rope. And if you decide to pull because the reward is just too good to give up in that moment, that praise is just too juicy, that recognition, that thing you got that you've been wanting, choose it. Choose it deliberately. Don't let it choose you. And then, if you're ready, when you're ready, cut the rope. Which Bhikkhu Bodhi says, the best antidote for relieving our pain, which is the reason we do most things, is to avoid pain, is to say, this is not mine, this is not me, this is not myself. Classical formula. Repeat in sutra after sutra. What the Buddha found, this is not mine, not this pleasure, not this pain. It is not me. It is not who I am. It does not define me. It is not myself. A short mantra to help us ride the waves. You know, where they're just these tiny, tiny little swells, or it's a tsunami. This is not me. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not mine. This is not me. This is myself. It's actually the order. That's like you ride the wave and you let it crest. You hold on for a moment and then you enjoy the ride down. It's actually possible when you're not holding on. I mean, maybe not as in, haha, I'm having such a good time. My body is breaking down in some way. But that you can actually get inside it and be like, this is okay. People have done this, have written about it. To let that wave pass, to let it fade. This is not mine. This is not me. This is not myself. And if that's true of everything, then where does that leave us? What does that give us? You know, the best part about this is that the answer is everything. It leaves us with everything.